He never thought that one day his entire life would revolve around fighting hunger. He never thought he'd be holding his little son's hand in one and gripping nothing but dreams in the other. No money, no home, no job, just dreams and the crushing weight of responsibility. Chris Gardner stood at a crossroads where life only seemed to go downhill, but inside him burned a fire that could have died at any moment. But he refused to let it go out. When the world said, "You've lost," he swallowed his tears and forced a smile when life pushed him onto the streets. Even then, he didn't stop dreaming. Because that dream wasn't just his. It was his son's too. A small, innocent smile that gave him the strength to endure every insult, every humiliation, every night spent in darkness, and every morning that began with uncertainty. Chris wasn't an ordinary man. He was a symbol for every soul who thinks it's over, for those who believe pain is the end of the story, for those who've forgotten how to dream. Chris's story is a slap to every excuse and a lifeline to every heart that wakes up crying, but still whispers, "Maybe one day everything will be okay." Chris never had a silver spoon. He only knew overdue bills, eviction notices, cold stares and hospital visits where his son burned with fever while he stood helpless without money for medicine. In those moments, his heart screamed, but his eyes stayed dry because he didn't have the luxury to cry. He had only one path keep. Moving to stop was death, and walking was his revenge against a world that tried to break him. Chris once said, "When your dream is so big it scares you, that's how you know you're on the right path." His dream wasn't to make money. It was to earn dignity, to create a safe space for his son to sleep peacefully every night when his wife walked away at the worst possible moment. No money, no job. Chris didn't beg her to stay. He said, "Go ahead. Leave me. I'll stay. I'll fight. I'll win. And one day you'll remember the man you left behind." He did every job a desperate father could imagine. He slept in public restrooms, held his son in his lap inside train stations, stood in line for hours begging shelters for a single night he gave. Interviews on an empty stomach, smiled when life slapped him, and stood up every single time he was knocked down. Chris wasn't a prince. He was a warrior with no sword, only belief, and that belief was so unshakable it turned the impossible into reality. His story isn't glitter. It's raw pain. It's a father's silent cry, a child's unbreakable bond, and a man's burning obsession to prove that even if he loses everything, he will never lose hope, never lose faith, never lose his smile. During internship interviews, he had no tie, no clean shirt, but he had confidence worth more than any suit. He didn't answer questions with knowledge, he answered with hunger, with passion, with visions of a life he refused to accept as permanent. Every time someone asked, "Why should we choose you?" Chris saw his son's face and poured everything he had into that. One moment people say, "Destiny is fixed." Chris proved destiny is for those who dare to rewrite it. He walked out of that internship, shift with nothing but inner peace and a hungry child. Yet he felt alive because he never left anything incomplete. Chris knocked on doors every day, got rejected every hour, heard no 100 times a day, but never once did he think about giving up. Every single step he took was soaked in exhaustion, yet driven by love. He carried his dreams in one hand and his child in the other, and believed that one day, he'd look his son in the eyes and say, "We made it." He chose not to break when everything else shattered, when he had nothing left but belief and a will to rise again and again. This was the turning point, not when he got rich, not when he got the job, but when he refused to surrender, when the world expected him to vanish, and he stayed loud, proud, and burning with purpose. Chris Gardner didn't just survive, he created a legacy for every person standing at rock bottom, his journey says. Even when you've lost everything, if you keep moving, the world will have no choice. But to watch you rise, he lost everything, but then he built something that shook the entire world. There was a morning when Chris woke up Not in a bathroom, not in a shelter, not on a bus bench, but in a real room with sunlight pouring in, not fear for breakfast, but hope. And for the first time in what felt like forever, his son was still asleep, calm, warm, safe. And Chris just sat there silently staring at that moment, because this was the moment he had been chasing through every dark hallway, every cold night, every rejected handshake. This was not the end of the struggle, but it was the beginning of a new chapter where he no longer had to explain to his son why they were moving again or why he was crying in his sleep. It was the chapter where the world would finally see the man who refused to bend, the man who stood against fate and built. His own Chris was told there was no salary in that internship. He knew it, but he also knew what they didn't, that his drive was worth more than money, and his time was an investment in the life he refused to let die. So every morning he got up, ironed his shirt by laying it flat under a heavy book, wiped his shoes with napkins, smiled in mirrors that weren't even his, and told himself this pain will not go to waste. And one day, one ordinary day, they called him into a room, the same people, who barely looked at him, who raised their eyebrows when he walked in, wearing the same shirt again. The same people who had judged him silently now stood quietly and told him something that broke him wide open. Inside, they said, "Congratulations, you're hired." Chris couldn't speak. He could only nod. His lips trembled and his heart raced. And every no he had heard every night on the floor, every moment of self-doubt came crashing into that one word, congratulations. It wasn't just a job offer, it was a silent scream to the world that he had made it. He walked out of that office not like a man who had found a job, but like a warrior who had just won the longest battle of his life. He didn't run to buy a car, he didn't throw a party, he just held his son a little tighter and whispered, "We did it. We really did it." And in that whisper lived every sleepless night, every broken dream, every moment he had wanted to give up and didn't. Chris didn't just climb out of poverty. He climbed. Out of despair, out of invisibility, he climbed out of every box people put him in and lit a torch for millions behind him to follow. He built a company from the ground up. He stood on stages with presidents. He told his story to rooms that once would have ignored him. And every time he spoke for the ones still sleeping on train benches, the ones still knocking on locked doors, the ones still chasing light through tunnels that never seemed to end. Chris Gardner became more than a man. He became a symbol, a living reminder that even when the world gives up on you, you do not have to give up on yourself. He gave the world a message not written in books, not taught in schools, but lived through pain and carved in reality. That message said your circumstances do not define you. Your decisions do. When people say you can't, let that be fuel. When they say it's impossible, let that be reason. And when they say you've lost, stand taller and whisper, "Not yet." Because sometimes the biggest wins come after the longest waits. And sometimes the ones who seem the weakest are carrying the strongest storms inside them. Chris didn't become rich because he chased money. He became rich because he refused to settle. He refused to let his son grow up believing life is only about survival. He wanted him to believe in living and dreaming, in choosing greatness, even when the odds are unfair and everything is stacked against you. And maybe you watching this, maybe you feel broken, maybe you feel like nothing is working and the walls are closing in. Just know that someone once slept in a public restroom too. Someone once begged for shelter too. Someone once held their child with empty pockets and still stood up the next day. Someone once looked hopeless just like you and still became unstoppable just like Chris. And if he could do it, if he could rise from that kind of darkness and still shine, that means you can too. Because the fire inside you is not accidental. It was placed there for a reason, to light the path not only for you, but for everyone watching you walk through it. One day you'll tell your story and someone else will say, because of you, I didn't give up. And when that day comes, remember this moment. Remember the pain, the tears, the doubts, because they are shaping you into someone unshakable, someone unforgettable, someone the world will never be able to ignore. And if this story moved you, if it touched something deep inside your heart, then take a second, right now, to support the message. Hit the like button, share this with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel, because every time you do, you help this voice reach another soul lost in silence, and together we rise.